Walter Pruitt heard the tow truck before he saw the man who had come to take his wife's memory away. It came up the gravel drive before the sun had cleared the tree line, the grinding idle of a heavy vehicle moving slow and deliberate, the way bad news always came. He heard it from the kitchen and set his coffee mug on the counter without finishing it. White mug, small chip on the rim. Ruth had been meaning to throw it away for years. He had kept it. He stepped onto the porch. The tow truck stopped at the edge of the gravel lot. Behind it, a dark blue Ford sedan, clean in the way, only a town car stays clean, pulled up, and Clifford Haynes stepped out before the engine had finished dying. Gray suit, tie straight, manila envelope held at his side like a verdict already signed. Deputy Roy Tacker got out of the passenger seat. He looked at the gravel. Walter came down the porch steps slowly. His right knee had been giving him trouble since February, but he did not let it show. He stood at the bottom and kept his arms at his sides, the posture of a man who has decided not to flinch. "Morning, Walter," Haynes said. "Clifford." Haynes held up the envelope. "Payment was due the 15th. It's the 22nd. I know what day it is. Then you know why we're here." Walter looked at the barn. Inside, parked where it had sat for 22 years, was his 1958 Ford F-100, faded blue. A crack in the passenger mirror from 1964, when Ruth misjudged a gatepost and they had laughed about it for a week. "That truck belonged to my father," Walter said. "I rebuilt the engine myself." Haynes did not look at the barn. He looked at Walter with the patience of a man who has already decided the conversation is over. "It's listed as collateral on the loan agreement. Those are the terms you signed. I've got a buyer coming Saturday, 3 days, cash sale on the East 40. I understand that." "Then you understand I can cover the debt." Haynes opened the envelope and removed a single sheet of paper. He held it out, not offering it, displaying it. "The agreement says the 15th, Walter. What you have coming Saturday doesn't change what was due last week." He paused. Then, without ceremony, without cruelty, with something worse than either complete indifference, he said, "A vehicle is collateral. It is not a memory. The bank cannot accept memories as payment." Roy Tacker flinched, just barely. He was still looking at the gravel. Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Roy." Roy looked up. "You grew up 3 miles from here," Walter said. "You ate at my table." Something moved across Roy's face. Not enough to matter, but enough to see. He looked past Walter at the barn. "I'm sorry, Walter," he said quietly. "I don't have a choice here." He went into the barn. The tow truck driver, a young man with red hair who had clearly not been told what this job would feel like, climbed out of the cab and stared at the ground. A minute later, the F-100 came out of the barn into the morning light. The faded blue caught the sun the way it always had, warm and a little worn, the color of something that had been through weather and kept going. The chain went on. Walter started toward the truck. He moved with purpose, with the particular stride of a man who has just remembered something he cannot leave behind. "Walter," Haynes said. "There's a photograph," Walter said, "in the glove box, of my wife. I just need to get it." Haynes looked at Roy. Roy looked at his boots. Then Roy looked at Haynes. "Let him get the photograph," Roy said. It was the closest thing to courage Roy Tacker had managed in a long time, and it was not enough. Haynes said, "The vehicle is under bank authority now. Anything inside it is part of the collateral until the impound paperwork is processed." Walter stopped walking. He stood in the gravel with the morning light on his face and the chain on his truck and a photograph of his dead wife locked inside a vehicle being taken by a man in a gray suit who had just explained that memories did not count as payment. He did not argue. He did not plead. He stood there until the chain pulled taut and the F-100 rolled out of the lot and turned onto the county road and disappeared. Then he went back inside. Down at the edge of the farm's gravel drive, where it met the county blacktop, a dusty car had pulled to the shoulder. The driver was standing beside the open hood, looking at the engine with his sleeves rolled up and his sunglasses hooked in his shirt pocket. Not tall, not imposing. Just a man whose car had quit on him in the middle of Kansas, which was a thing that happened. He had watched all of it. He had watched the chain go on. He had watched Walter Pruitt walk toward the truck and stop. He had watched the tow truck pull out onto the road, passing within 20 feet of where he stood. He watched Walter Pruitt's face as the F-100 went by. Then he turned back to the engine. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked down the road, in the direction the truck had gone. He lowered the hood slowly. Millard, Kansas was the kind of town that had always been almost big enough for a second diner, almost big enough for a proper hardware store, almost big enough for people to stop knowing each other's business. But not quite. Never quite. Walter Pruitt had been part of Millard's fabric for so long that people tended to think of him the way they thought of the grain elevator or the Lutheran church on Birchwood, something you stopped noticing only because you could not imagine the place without it. He had bought the farm in 1931, the year after his father died, with money kept in a coffee can under the kitchen floorboards. He learned to farm by asking questions and making mistakes in the order that mattered least. By 1940, he was growing enough wheat to keep 3 families fed through the hard years. He married Ruth Calloway in 1955, and the whole town came. The food at the reception ran out before the music did. He had bought the phone 100 inches 1,958 from a man heading to California, $420. He drove it home on a Wednesday evening while Ruth sat with her feet on the dashboard. She always did that in the summer, and they talked about nothing in particular the whole way, which was the best kind of talking. That truck had carried 3 decades of work. It had hauled feed, fence posts, broken equipment, hay bales that needed 2 men and only had 1. It had driven Ruth to the hospital in 1962 with a broken arm, and again in the winter of 1968 when they both understood, without saying it, that the news would not be good. It had taken her to every appointment after that, moving through the flat Kansas mornings with the particular dignity of a vehicle carrying something irreplaceable. When Ruth died in March of 1969, Walter drove home from the hospital alone. He sat in the driveway in the dark for a long time before he could go inside. He had never told Delia that. But Delia knew, because daughters always know the things their fathers cannot say. She had come back to Millard 2 weeks after the funeral. She gave up her teaching position in Salina and moved back into her childhood bedroom without complaint, and she told her father it was because Millard Elementary had an opening. Walter told her she did not have to do that. Neither of them said what it really was. She had been tracking the loan situation since January, a debt of $1,100, borrowed against the truck when the harvest came in thin, and the cost of keeping the farm's equipment running had eaten through everything else. A bad season, not a ruined one. Manageable, Walter said. He had a plan. A land buyer named Carl Emmett was coming Saturday with cash for the East 40 acres. 3 days. Easy. Delia found out about the truck from Norma Sills, who walked down to the school at noon and told her quietly and without softening it, because Norma had learned that honest news delivered gently was still honest news. Delia did not cry. She sat on the school steps for 3 minutes with her hands flat on her knees and her eyes very still. Then she went back inside and taught the rest of the afternoon. At 4:15 she walked into First Consolidated Bank. Haynes saw her coming through the glass partition and stood up with the readiness of a man who had been expecting this and had already decided how it would go. "Miss Pruitt," he said, "I was hoping to speak with you." "I'll bet," she said. She stood on the other side of his desk, straight-backed, hands quiet, the teacher's posture, and she said, "My father has a buyer coming Saturday. The money will be there in 3 days. The agreement's terms." "I've read the agreement." She held his gaze. "What I need you to understand is that you sent a tow truck to my father's farm this morning, and my father tried to retrieve a photograph of my mother from the glove box of that truck, and you stopped him." She let that sit. "That photograph has been in that truck for 9 years. You left it locked inside a vehicle going to the impound lot because it did not appear on your collateral list." Haynes held her gaze with the practiced stillness of a man who had survived many hard conversations and planned to survive this one. "The bank's position is wrong," she said, "and I think somewhere behind that suit, you know it." She walked out. On the sidewalk, the afternoon light was long and orange, and the kind of beautiful that felt unfair. Across Main Street, through the window of Sill's diner, she could see her father at the counter, hands around a mug he was not drinking from, looking at a space that used to have something in it. She had never seen him look small before. Clifford Haynes had not come to Millard planning to be the villain of anyone's story. He had come because the salary was better than Wichita, and because Wichita had started to feel like a town full of corners his ex-wife used to stand in. He told himself he was a reasonable man. He kept the branch's delinquency rate below the regional average. He attended Chamber of Commerce meetings. He ate lunch at Sills Diner and left appropriate tips. What he had stopped being able to do was see the difference between a debt and a life. In Wichita, a delinquent account was a file number. In Millard, Walter Pruitt's $1,100 was 40 years of work on the same land, and a truck that a man had driven his dying wife to her appointments in, and a photograph locked in a glove box that the bank had decided was collateral. Haynes had sent 2 written notices. Walter had replied with handwritten letters on blue-lined paper from Doyle's feed, explaining the land sale and requesting a short extension. Polite, clear. The kind of letters a dignified man writes when he still believes the system works the way it claims to. Haynes had filed the letters and sent a 3rd notice with the 15th as the hard date. The 15th had passed. He had acted. That was the version he carried. What he had not told anyone, not the tellers, not Roy Tacker, not the regional office, was that he had lunch with Dale Corbin 3 weeks earlier, and that Corbin had mentioned Walter Pruitt's East 40 acres with a specific quality of interest. Corbin was a property broker from Wichita. He had a way of knowing which farms were under pressure before the farmers themselves understood how much trouble they were in. Haynes had not agreed to anything explicit. He never did. He just moved on the loan when the date arrived, which happened to be 7 days before a cash buyer was coming to settle everything cleanly. He was eating a turkey sandwich at his desk when a teller knocked on the partition glass and pointed toward the lobby. A man at the second window, worn leather jacket. The compact, settled build of someone who had been comfortable in their own body for a long time. He was speaking quietly to the teller, who was shaking her head. Haynes came out. "Can I help you?" The man turned. Blue-gray eyes. A face that had weather in it without being old. He looked at Haynes with a calm that was, for reasons Haynes could not name, mildly unsettling. "Just asking about the Pruitt account," the man said. "Heard there was activity this morning. I can't discuss other customers' accounts with a third party." "Sure." The man looked around the lobby slowly, not curiosity exactly, more like a man taking inventory. Then back to Haynes. "One question. The notice you sent Mr. Pruitt, was it delivered in person or by mail?" Haynes kept his expression neutral. "That's a procedural detail I'm not in a position to discuss." "Right," the man said. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and walked out. Haynes stood in the middle of the lobby. Something about that question sat wrong with him, the way a sound sits wrong when you cannot identify its source. He went back to his office. He looked at the sandwich. He was no longer hungry. Outside on the sidewalk, the man in the leather jacket stood and looked down Main Street. The afternoon had turned warm, and the Kansas light was doing the thing it did in May, coming in low and gold from the west, making everything look like it had been there a long time and intended to stay. The storefronts on Main Street had that quality. Doyle's feed, the Millard Gazette with its hand-lettered weekly in the window, the hardware half-store, the barber shop where the red and white pole turned at its own unhurried pace. Through the window of Sills Diner he could see Walter Pruitt at the counter. Norma was filling a mug that did not need filling. A woman, the daughter, clearly was in the doorway with her hand on the glass, looking at her father with the expression of someone who wants to fix something and knows you cannot always fix the right thing. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and walked toward the diner. He had not eaten since early morning. His car was on the shoulder of the county road, and the mechanic was closed until tomorrow. He had nowhere to be until the engine was running again, and he had always been good at using time that would otherwise go to waste. You learned that on sets, waiting for light that never came when the call sheet said it would, and in garages, waiting for a part that was 3 states away. You learned to find what was in a room while you were in it. He pushed open the door of Sills Diner. The bell above the door made its small sound. 3 people at the counter looked up briefly. Norma did not look up. She was already in motion, already heading toward the far end of the counter with a mug and the coffee pot, as if she had known he was coming. He sat 3 stools from Walter Pruitt and ordered coffee and whatever pie did not have meringue, because he had never trusted meringue. Norma brought him cherry without a word. He ate without hurrying and listened to the room without appearing to listen. The cherry pie was good. The coffee was the honest kind, strong and without apology, the kind that does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. He ate slowly, without hurrying, and let the room settle around him the way rooms settle when you stop trying to control them. Sills Diner had the atmosphere of a place that had been exactly what it was for a very long time. The counter was worn smooth at the elbows. The vinyl on the stools was cracked in the same places it had probably been cracked for a decade. The menu board above the kitchen window had prices that had not changed since Eisenhower, which told you something about what Norma Sills thought of inflation and of people who used it as an excuse. The neon sign in the window buzzed at a frequency that you stopped hearing after about 3 minutes, which was also how long it took to feel like you had been coming here your whole life. Norma Sills ran the counter the way certain people run rooms with absolute authority, no written law, and everyone's interests quietly managed whether they wanted it managed or not. She refilled his coffee without asking. That was how he knew she approved of him, because she did the same for Walter, and she was clearly on Walter Pruitt's side, with the conviction of someone who had been on the right side of things for 71 years and had no intention of starting to slip now. Walter was sitting 3 stools away with Delia beside him, and neither of them was saying much. Walter had arrived at the diner 20 minutes before his daughter, and he had sat in the same spot and not moved and not eaten anything, just held the coffee mug and looked at a point between the salt shaker and the napkin holder, the way a man looks when he is staring at something that is not there. When Delia arrived from the bank, she had sat beside him and told him about the conversation with Haynes in the measured, clear way she delivered difficult things, which was the teacher in her, the belief that clarity was a form of kindness. Walter had listened without interrupting. Then they were both quiet. Delia had her hand on his. The conversation had the texture of people who have run out of the comfortable things to say and are now just keeping each other company in the hard ones. He heard Walter say, very quietly, "It's not the money," and Delia say, "I know. Last time she sat in that truck, she was watching the wheat field out the window. Said it looked like it went on forever." He stopped. "I wasn't ready to have it gone." The man at the end of the counter looked at his coffee cup. He had been around enough loss to know that the worst kind was not the dramatic kind, not the kind with shouting and broken things, and moments people could point to afterward and say, that was when it happened. The worst kind was this kind. A man sitting very still at a diner counter, looking at a space that used to have something in it, trying to figure out how a person was supposed to keep going in the ordinary directions of a day. He watched Walter's hands, flat on the counter, palms down, calloused at the base of each finger, the knuckles enlarged from cold mornings and decades of work that had no gentle season, completely still, the kind of stillness that comes after everything else has been used up. He was not a man who acted quickly on incomplete information. He had learned that patience was not passive, it was the active work of understanding a situation before you moved in it. So he turned his coffee cup slowly and thought. In 30 minutes of listening, he had assembled the relevant pieces without asking for them. The debt was $1,100. A buyer was coming Saturday with cash for the East 40. The truck had been taken 7 days before that sale would close. The banker who moved 7 days early was the same man he had seen at the second teller window that morning, and the question about the notice method in person versus mailed was not a procedural footnote. In contracts, it was almost never a footnote. He had heard something at the gas station that afternoon from the kid pumping fuel, the way you hear things in small towns when you ask simple questions and look like someone who has no particular agenda. Haynes had been seen twice in the last month at the Millard Steakhouse with a man named Dale Corbin, who was a property broker out of Wichita. The kid had mentioned it the way people mention local gossip casually, without connecting it to anything, but most information came that way. He filed it. Then he built the shape of it slowly, the way he built everything from the specific facts outward. The East 40 was prime farmland, deep water table, the kind of soil that produced reliably and was worth considerably more than a farmer in trouble was likely to know or be told. A cash buyer was 3 days away. A banker connected to a property broker was moving a week early, and 2 farmers on the same county road had sold land cheap in the past year to buyers from Wichita. That was a pattern. Patterns were not proof, but they were where you started. He did not rush the conclusion. He looked at it from the sides and tested the weak points. Then he signaled Norma for another coffee. Norma poured and gave him the look of a woman who recognized that the man at the end of her counter was doing something specific and useful, even if she could not yet say exactly what it was. She did not ask. She went back to the kitchen. The pie case rotated slowly behind its glass. He drank the coffee and thought about the loan agreement. If it had the clause he suspected it had and most bank agreements written by cautious institutions did, Because cautious institutions protected themselves against exactly this kind of challenge, then the morning's seizure had a problem. A real one. The kind that an attorney with the right specialty could turn into something solid by morning. He needed to read the document. And he needed to find a phone. He stayed until Walter and Delia left at 6, when the light outside went the amber color that flat Kansas land catches better than anywhere else. He watched them go, Walter slow but not bent, Delia one step to his left, close enough to reach him if she needed to. Then he turned to Norma. "Tell me about Clifford Haynes," he said. Norma stopped wiping the counter. She held the cloth. "Why?" she said. "I'm curious." "You've been at my counter for 2 hours," Norma said. "1 piece of pie, 3 coffees, and the whole time you've been listening to things that aren't your business." She paused. "So you're either nosy or you're the kind of man who listens before he decides what to do." "Second one," he said. She studied him with the evaluative look she applied to everyone who sat at her counter, which was a look that had never failed her. "Haynes came 5 years ago from Wichita," she said. "Replaced Gerald Marsh, who ran that bank for 32 years and never once made a farmer feel like a number. Since Haynes arrived, loan approval rate went down, foreclosure rate went up. He's legal, I'll give him that." She wrung out the cloth. "He's also been very interested in the farmland on the east side of this county, has some kind of arrangement with a property man from Wichita." "Dale Corbin," he said. Norma stopped. She looked at him fully. "Who are you?" "Just a man with a broken car," he said. She studied him for a long moment. Then something settled in her face, not shock, but the adjustment a person makes when something they thought was one size turns out to be larger. "Lord," she said softly, "you're Steve McQueen." He looked at her without changing his expression. "Not yet," he said. "Not yet? Right now I'm a man with a broken car who read a question in a contract." He held her gaze. "Don't make it about the name. Not yet." Norma looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded once, the way sensible people nod when they know someone is right. "The pattern," he said. "Corbin and Haynes. What's the shape of it?" Norma folded the cloth. "I don't know the details. But 3 farmers on the East County Road have had loan trouble in the past 2 years. All of them ended up selling land, fast, cheap, to buyers from Wichita. Gordon Fletcher sold 40 acres last fall and told my counter he felt wrong about the price but needed the money. Dwayne Milner had an equipment notice last spring, paid it fast, didn't talk about it." She paused. "Walter's East 40 is prime land, deep water table, worth considerably more than people in trouble usually get for it." He nodded slowly. "If Walter's situation got bad enough, if he lost more than just the truck, he might have to sell the whole east side at whatever someone offered," Norma said. "And if his Saturday buyer walked away because things looked too complicated, Walter would be in Corbin's pocket," he said. "That's the shape of it," Norma said. He stood up, left money on the counter enough without being theatrical about it, and put on his jacket. "Is there a phone I can use?" She pointed to the wall phone by the kitchen door. He made a call that lasted 4 minutes. Norma heard fragments: loan agreement, in-person notice requirement, county recorder, and tomorrow morning. When he came back, he had the settled look of a man who has found the first piece of a plan and confirmed it is solid. "One more thing," he said. "Walter, where does he keep his paperwork?" "Tin box on the shelf above the stove," Norma said. "Receipts going back 30 years. Walter keeps everything." He nodded. Then at the door he stopped. "Don't tell anyone I'm here." "I know how to keep my mouth shut," Norma said, "but I want you to know that family is good people. What happened to them today was wrong." "Yes," he said. "It was." He went out into the evening. Walter answered the door on the second knock. He did not recognize the man on his porch. His eyes had been troubling him since winter, and he refused new glasses on the grounds that his current pair was fine. He looked at the figure in the fading light and said, "Help you?" "I hope so," the man said. "Car broke down 2 miles out. I've been in town most of the day. Norma said you might let me stay in the barn tonight, until the mechanic opens tomorrow." Walter considered this. Norma said that. She did. Walter opened the door wider. "Come in. I'll put coffee on." The kitchen was what you expected of a man managing alone, clean, functional, a little sparse. A calendar on the wall with a mountain photograph from somewhere that was not Kansas. 2 chairs at the table instead of 4, because Walter had moved the other two to the spare room in March of 1969 and never moved them back. The tin box was on the shelf above the stove. Walter made coffee without asking what the man wanted, which the man appreciated. They sat across from each other, and Walter said, without preamble, "You hear about what happened this morning?" "Some of it," the man said. "Banker took my truck." Walter wrapped both hands around his mug. "He's got the law on his side." "Probably. But it's wrong. Tell me about the loan agreement." Walter did not ask why. He got up, took the tin box off the shelf, and spread the papers on the table. The man read the loan agreement slowly. He read it the way you read something when you know the answer is in the language and you are going to find it. On the second pass, near the bottom of page 2, he stopped. "This clause," he said, and put his finger on the paragraph. Walter leaned over. He read it twice. "What does it mean?" "It means the bank must deliver written notice in person, 48 hours before taking any collateral action. Not mailed notice. In person, to you directly." He looked at Walter. "Did Haynes or anyone from the bank deliver anything to you in person in the last 48 hours?" Walter sat back. He thought. He was a careful man, and he thought carefully. "No. Last thing I had was a letter through the mail. 9 days ago." Walter sat back. "Do you have it?" Walter found it in the box, still in its envelope, postmarked, dated. "Final notice, 15th, printed in bold at the top. That's mailed notice," the man said. "The agreement says in person. Those are not the same thing. Under the terms Haynes himself wrote and you signed. This morning's seizure was not legally valid. The kitchen was quiet." Walter looked at the documents. Then he looked at the man across his table, the leather jacket, the rolled sleeves, the face he had been trying to place since the porch. "Who are you?" he said. The man held his gaze. A pause of about 4 seconds. "Someone who reads contracts carefully," he said. Walter looked at him a little longer. Then he looked at the loan agreement. "Will it help get the truck back?" "Depends on a few calls I need to make tonight and who's willing to come tomorrow." He picked up the agreement and the notice. "Can I borrow these?" Walter looked at the papers. They were his name, his signature, his family story, compressed into 3 pages, and a postmarked envelope. He looked at the man and made the judgment that farmers make about weather, livestock, and people, not with certainty, but with experience and gut. "Yes," he said. The man folded the papers carefully into his jacket pocket. "Your daughter, is she nearby?" 3 blocks from the school. Rents a house on Elm. She should be here tomorrow morning, early." Walter studied him. "You want to tell me what you think happens tomorrow?" "Right." The man stood up from the table. "I think we go to the bank," he said. "And I think Clifford Haynes is going to have a harder day than he's planned for." He went out through the kitchen door. Walter stood at the window and watched the figure cross the dark yard toward the barn, unhurried, steady, moving the way a man moves when he has picked up the thread of something and intends to follow it all the way through. The yard was dark, except for the light from the kitchen window reaching across the gravel, and the barn was a black shape against the lighter black of the Kansas sky, which always had more stars in it than you remembered until you were standing under it again. Walter stood at the window for a while. He thought about the clause in the agreement. He thought about the question, was it delivered in person? He thought about the fact that nobody, not Delia, not himself, not anyone he had spoken to, had thought to read that far into the document. He had signed it and trusted it, because he had always trusted the instruments of commerce to mean what they said. Most of them did. Some did not, and those were the ones that mattered. He went to bed, which was unusual for him. Most nights since Ruth died, he sat in the kitchen for a while, first not doing anything specific, just occupying the space, getting used to the sound of the house without her in it, which was a thing he was still, after 3 years, getting used to. But that night he went to bed. He did not sleep well. He slept. News in Millard traveled at the speed of a town where everybody already knew what they were going to be surprised by. By 8 in the morning, a version of events had spread through the diner, the feed store, and the post office. Not accurate in its particulars, it never was in Millard, which had a talent for getting the emotional truth of a thing right, while missing the details entirely but true, where it counted. Something was happening with Walter Pruitt and the bank, and there was a stranger involved, and the stranger seemed like he knew something that other people had missed. Norma had told no one. This was irrelevant. Millard had its own mechanisms. Margaret Dean, who handled the post office window and walked past First Consolidated every morning on her way in, had noticed Haynes's office lights on at 7:15, which was 45 minutes earlier than usual. She mentioned it to Frank Dooley when she stopped at the feed store for grain supplement. Frank was married to the first cousin of Walter Pruitt's late wife, which meant Frank had opinions about the Pruitt situation that were loud and specific. The lights being on early connected in Frank's mind to the tow truck he had seen on the county road the previous morning. He mentioned both things to 3 people before 9 o'clock. By 8:30, the diner had 11 people at the counter and in the booths, where a normal Friday had 7. Nobody was there just for the eggs. Though the eggs at Sills were genuinely good, Norma had been getting them from the Whitfield farm for 22 years, and they were the kind of eggs that ruined you for grocery store eggs forever. Dwayne Milner was at the counter eating oatmeal he had stopped tasting 20 minutes ago. He had been there since 7:30. He had the look of a man who has been carrying something in his chest for a long time, something that had recently become too heavy to carry any further without putting it down somewhere and letting someone else see what it was. Through the window on Jefferson Street, 2 blocks east, Walter Pruitt's F-100 sat behind the chain-link fence of the county impound lot. The faded blue was visible from Main Street if you looked, and by 9 o'clock most of Millard had found a reason to look. Several people had walked down Jefferson on errands that did not strictly require walking down Jefferson. Nobody said anything directly, but they stood near the fence a moment longer than they needed to. Harold Tull, who owned the grain elevator where Walter had done business for 30 years, came in at 8:15 and sat at the end booth with a coffee he did not need and said to Gerald Park, who ran the insurance agency, "What that bank did is wrong." Gerald Park said banks had to protect their interests. Harold said there was a difference between protecting an interest and stealing a man's memory while his back was turned. Gerald Park did not have a good answer for that, and spent the next 10 minutes looking like he was looking for one. Gordon Fletcher came in at 8:45 without being called. He was 64 and had sold his 40 acres the previous fall to a buyer from Wichita who had appeared at the right moment when Gordon needed money fast. The price had been below what Gordon thought the land was worth, but above what he thought he could get quickly, and he had taken it. He had thought about it several times since, and the thought had never been comfortable. He sat at a booth by himself and ordered coffee and looked out the window at Jefferson Street. Deputy Roy Tacker came past the diner on his morning route at 8 o'clock and paused outside the window. He looked in at the fuller-than-usual crowd. His reflection in the glass showed a man who was not sleeping well. He had not slept well since Thursday morning, when he had stood in Walter Pruitt's barn lot and looked at his boots while the chain went on. He had done what he was told because Haynes had the paperwork, and Roy had never been able to find the specific courage required to look at paperwork and say, correct on its face and wrong in its soul. That was a harder courage than the physical kind. Roy had the physical kind in reasonable supply. The other kind was where he came up short. He stood outside the diner window for a moment. Then he walked on. But his step was slower than usual, and his hat was further back on his head, and he had the look of a man who has started an argument with himself that he is not going to win. At 8:50, a rental sedan pulled up in front of First Consolidated. Clean car, borrowed for the morning. Walter and Delia Pruitt got out. The man in the leather jacket held the door for Delia. Roy Tacker, half a block away, stopped and watched. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands at his sides and watched the 3 of them go through the bank's front door. Then he stood there for another moment. Then he turned and walked toward the county impound lot on Jefferson Street. He did not go in. He stood outside the fence and looked at the F-100, the faded blue paint, the crack in the passenger mirror, the truck that had carried Ruth Pruitt to every appointment in her last 2 years of life. Roy Tacker had eaten at Walter Pruitt's table. His father had helped Walter put up a section of fence in the summer of 1958. These things were in the record of who they were to each other, and Roy had let a banker with a gray suit use that record as a footstool. He stood at the fence for a long time. Then he went back to his morning route, and he was thinking very hard about what a man with a badge was actually for. Delia had gotten the call at 7 that morning. She had driven to the farm, met the stranger at the kitchen table, and read the loan agreement while he pointed to the clause. She read it twice, slowly, with the careful attention she brought to things that mattered. Then she sat back. "This is real?" she said. "It's in the document he wrote," the man said. "The question now is what we do with it." She looked at him across the kitchen table with the evaluating eye of a teacher who had spent 10 years assessing people quickly and usually correctly. She looked at his face and made her assessment. In the car, she had asked his name. He told her. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the county road going past. "That's not what I was expecting," she said. "Does it change anything?" he said. She thought about it for 2 honest seconds. "No," she said. "Good," he said. They walked into First Consolidated at 8:52. Haynes met them in the lobby. He had seen them coming through the glass, and he had stood up the moment they walked through the door, which told you something that he had been expecting this, had spent the morning preparing for it, and had decided that prepared was the same as in control. "Mr. Pruitt. Miss Pruitt." Then, to the man in the leather jacket, "We've met." "Briefly," the man said. "I asked you about the notice method." "You did." Haynes let a half-beat pass the professional's technique for establishing that he was not hurried, not rattled, not anything but deliberate. "I'd prefer to discuss this in my office." They followed him behind the glass partition. The 2 tellers at their windows did not appear to be listening, which in a bank lobby with glass walls and no background music meant they were listening with the full and practiced attention of people who had learned to do so invisibly. Haynes went behind his desk. It was a broad desk, clean, with nothing on it that had not been placed there intentionally. He did not offer them chairs. Whether that was a tactical choice or habit, the effect was the same. He sat, they stood, and the desk was between them. The man in the leather jacket took the loan agreement from his inside pocket. He placed it on Haynes's desk, not dropped, not flourished, simply set down flat and smoothed once with the palm of his hand, the way a man lays something on a table when he wants everyone in the room to understand that it is the most important object in it. The manila was worn at the folds from a night in a jacket pocket. He pointed to the paragraph at the bottom of page 2. "Read that out loud," he said. Haynes looked at the clause. Something moved behind his eyes, a small thing, controlled, contained, but visible to someone who was watching for it. "I'm familiar with the document," he said. "I know," the man said. He did not add anything. He waited. A silence settled over the office. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone in a room understands that the next few seconds are going to determine the shape of what follows. Haynes looked at the man, then at Delia, then at Walter, who had not said a word since entering the building, and whose face had the quality of a man who had decided to let someone else carry this particular weight for a few minutes, and was managing that decision with great care. Haynes read the clause. His voice was steady. The words came out flat and clear in the quiet of the office, and through the glass partition behind them, in the lobby, the 2 tellers had gone absolutely still. Every word reached them, every word was absorbed. When Haynes finished, nobody spoke for 3 full seconds. "In-person delivery," the man said. 48 hours. That is what the agreement your bank wrote and your customer signed requires. He looked at Haynes, without heat, without theater. Just the directness of someone who has found the true thing and is pointing at it. "Did you deliver that notice in person to Walter Pruitt?" "We sent written." "That is not what I asked." Haynes was quiet. The man did not fill the silence for him. He let it sit there between them, solid and specific. "You sent a letter through the mail," the man said. 9 days ago, under the postal mark. That is not in-person delivery. That means the seizure that took place yesterday morning did not satisfy the conditions of the agreement you hold." He paused. "Let that settle." "Then, you took the truck early because you were afraid Saturday would make the debt disappear." Haynes kept his expression. "That is an interpretation." "It is an observation," the man said. "The buyer comes Saturday. The debt is paid. Your arrangement with Dale Corbin becomes considerably less useful." He held Haynes's gaze. "You didn't protect the bank. You used it." The silence that followed was not comfortable for anyone in the room. Through the glass partition, neither teller was pretending to do anything anymore. Delia spoke. She had been quiet for a long time, not because she did not have things to say, but because she had been waiting for the right moment. The way you wait when what you have to say is not an argument but a truth, and truths do not need to be rushed. Her voice was level and clear. It had the quality of someone who has spent 10 years speaking to rooms full of children who needed to understand difficult things, and who had learned that clarity delivered calmly went further than volume. "Mr. Haynes," she said, "my mother was sick for 2 years. My father drove her to every medical appointment in that truck. Everyone. The last time she sat in the passenger seat, she looked out at the wheat field and told him it looked like it went on forever. She paused. That truck is not a vehicle to our family. It is the last place my mother was still present. Her hands were on that dashboard. Her voice was in that cab. She held his gaze and did not look away. And yesterday morning, when my father tried to take her photograph out of the glove box, you told him that memories were not on the collateral list. A breath. I want you to know that I will remember that for the rest of my life, and I believe you will too. Haynes said nothing. For the first time in the conversation, he looked like a man who was aware that something was happening in this room that was bigger than a loan dispute, and that he had caused it. The man in the leather jacket gave him a moment. Then, last night I called an attorney in Topeka, James Bellamy. He specializes in banking regulation for the state of Kansas. He'll be in Millard this afternoon. A pause, measured and deliberate. He's been on the phone with the county recorder's office since 9 this morning. Haynes's face went very still. I want to know, the man said quietly, when Walter Pruitt gets his truck back. Haynes did not break. Whatever else he was not a man who broke easily. He asked them to give him time to consult legal counsel. He said the procedural question would need proper review. He said the vehicle would remain in impound pending that review, which was bank policy. He said all of this in the measured tone of a man who had not surrendered, who was regrouping. They left his office. In the lobby, Walter stopped and looked back through the glass at Haynes. The two men looked at each other across the partition. Walter turned and walked out. They went to the diner. Norma put them in the corner booth and brought coffee and did not make them explain anything. The diner was fuller than normal, and getting fuller. Gerald Park from the insurance agency was in a booth debating the bank's rights with Harold Tull from the grain elevator, who had done 30 years of business with Walter Pruitt and had a clearer sense of the man's character than any loan document. Duane Milner was still at the counter. He had been there for 2 hours on the same cup of coffee. He was watching the window that faced Jefferson Street, where the F-100 sat behind the fence. At 11:15 he got up and walked to the corner booth. He stood with his hat in his hands. He looked at Walter, then briefly at the man in the leather jacket, then back at Walter. I want to tell you something, he said. About my notice last spring. Sit down, Duane, Walter said. Duane sat. He put his hat on his knee and looked at the table. I had a buyer for my north pasture. Good price. Cash buyer. I told Haynes, asked for a short extension while the sale went through. He stopped. He moved on my equipment loan before the extension ran out. Same as what happened to you yesterday. I didn't fight it. I paid and sold the north pasture fast to whoever would have it. He paused. Turns out that buyer had a connection to a broker from Wichita. I found out later. By then, it was done. The man in the leather jacket said quietly, Corbin. Duane looked at him. He had been trying to place the face all morning. Something about it kept almost connecting. That was the name. Would you tell that to an attorney? Duane looked at Walter. Walter said nothing. That was Walter's way, he never pressed. Yes, Duane said. I'd tell it to an attorney. He picked up his hat and went back to the counter. He sat down with the posture of a man who has put down something heavy and is not sorry about it. At 12:30, Haynes walked into the diner. He came through the front door in his gray suit, looked across the room to the corner booth, and walked toward them with the step of a man who has made a calculation and is executing it. He was not subtle about it, which was his first mistake. The second was the room he had walked into. He stood at the table and said, quietly but not quietly enough, I want to settle this before it becomes more complicated than it needs to be. He looked at Walter. The bank is prepared to release the vehicle today. In exchange for a signed acknowledgement that the loan terms stand as written, the full balance is due the 1st of next month, and all claims regarding the seizure procedure are considered resolved. The 1st of next month, Delia said. The land sale closes Saturday. That should allow sufficient time. And what does all claims resolved mean? The man said. His voice had not changed its register. It had the same quiet quality it always had. Haynes looked at him. It means the bank considers the matter closed, and it means Walters signs away any right to pursue what happened yesterday, the man said. And what happened to Duane Milner last spring? And what happened to Gordon Fletcher when he sold his 40 acres cheap to a buyer connected to Dale Corbin? He did not raise his voice. He did not look away from Haynes. You're not here to settle a loan dispute. You're here to close a door before someone looks through it. The diner was not a loud room. It had not been loud all morning, but the quality of its quiet changed. At the counter, Dwayne Milner had turned around. At the booth by the window, Gordon Fletcher had gone very still. Harold Tull had stopped talking. Norma was behind the counter with the coffee pot and had not moved in 45 seconds. Haynes looked at the man in the leather jacket and for the first time said nothing. A contract doesn't become honest just because a banker signs it, the man said. And you didn't protect the bank this morning, Clifford. You used it. He said it quietly, without drama. The way you say a true thing. Norma set the coffee pot down on the counter. Clifford, she said, I think you should go. It was 11 words. In Norma's diner, those 11 words were a verdict. Haynes stood at the edge of the booth for a moment. Then he reached up and straightened his tie, a small, automatic gesture, the kind a man makes when he needs to do something with his hands and his hands are not quite steady. Then he turned and walked out without looking at anyone. James Bellamy drove from Topeka himself. In a dark green sedan he kept maintained the way a working man keeps his tools. He arrived at 1:45 and went directly to Sill's diner because that was where he was told to go. He walked in with a briefcase and the particular calm of a man who has done difficult work for a long time and no longer needed to demonstrate that he was capable of it. He and the man in the leather jacket spoke for 2 minutes outside on the sidewalk. Bellamy looked at the loan agreement, looked at the postmarked notice envelope, and nodded twice. Then they went inside. He shook Walter Pruitt's hand with both hands. He did not perform warmth. He felt it, which was different. Here is what we have, he said, and opened the briefcase. He placed 3 documents on the table. He explained each one in plain language, because that was how he had always worked. The first showed a pattern across 14 property transactions in eastern Millard County over 26 months. The pattern was simple once you could see it. A farmer fell behind on a loan at First Consolidated. Haynes moved early before the farmer's buyer arrived, before a sale could close and settle the debt cleanly. The farmer, suddenly desperate, sold land fast and cheap to whoever would take it. The buyers, in case after case, traced back to a holding company in Wichita whose registered agent was Dale Corbin. Within months, that same land was resold, at prices considerably higher than what the farmer had received. Pressure the farmer, buy the land cheap, resell it for profit. 14 times in 2 years, Bellamy said. Same county, same bank, same broker. You pressured them early, Delia said quietly. They had to sell fast. Corbin's people bought cheap, then resold. That appears to be the pattern, Bellamy said. The second document was a complaint Bellamy had filed with the state banking regulator that morning. The regulator's office had accepted it within the hour. A preliminary investigation was underway. The third document was a letter from First Consolidated's regional director, Arthur Fenn, in Wichita. Fenn had received Bellamy's call at 8 that morning and had made his own calls since 9. The letter directed the Millard branch to cease all collection activity on accounts named in the complaint and to release any collateral seized in the preceding 7 days that had not yet been disposed of. Walter Pruitt's 1,958 Ford F-100 had not been disposed of. It was still behind the fence on Jefferson Street. Walter read the letter. His lips moved slightly, the way they did when he read something that mattered. Then he sat back and put his hands flat on the table. He looked at the man in the leather jacket. In the afternoon light, coming through the diner's east windows, the face was clear and unmistakable, and 40 years of occasional movie-going and a few good years of television came together all at once. Son, Walter said very quietly, are you Steve McQueen? The man looked at him. Something small moved across his face, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. Yes, sir, he said. Walter Pruitt looked at him for a long time. The kitchen behind him was making its usual sounds. Norma had gone very quiet at the counter. Well, Walter said, I'll be damned. Delia had known since the car ride that morning, and had said nothing because it did not change anything that mattered. She put her hand on her father's arm. At 2:15, Deputy Roy Tacker came through the diner door. He had the impound keys in his hand, a plain ring, a metal tag marked in grease pencil. He walked to the corner booth and set them on the table. He stood there with his hat in his hand. Walter, he said, I'm sorry. I should have said no yesterday morning. I knew it was wrong and I didn't say it. Walter looked at him. Roy Tacker had eaten at his table. Roy's father had helped Walter put up a section of fence on the south boundary in 1958, and Walter had helped Roy's father shingle his roof the following year. These things were in the record of who they were to each other. "I know you are," Walter said. Roy nodded. "I'm going to talk to the county sheriff about some things I should have said a while ago." He paused. Dwayne Milner said the same. "If you were wondering." He put his hat back on and went out. Walter picked up the key from the table. The worn Ford logo was almost gone from the key's head. The cut was familiar in his hand, the particular weight of a key you have handled thousands of times. He held it the way you hold something you thought was gone. Bellamy closed his briefcase and told them the review would take time, but the regulatory attention was real and serious. He said he could not promise outcomes, but he could promise diligence, which was what honest attorneys said and meant. He shook Walter's hand again and nodded at Steve McQueen with the specific nod of one professional acknowledging another who has done good work. Then he left. Gordon Fletcher, at his booth by the window, had listened to everything. He sat with his coffee going cold and his hands on the table and thought about 40 acres sold cheap to a man from Wichita and the wrong feeling he had carried since. When Bellamy's car pulled out of the parking spot on Main Street, Gordon looked at his hands for a long moment. Then he got up and walked to the counter and asked Norma for Bellamy's telephone number in Topeka. Norma had it. She always had what was needed. The diner had been the center of everything this morning and afternoon. That was what diners in small towns were, at their best, not just places to eat, but places where a community came to take the measure of itself. And what Millard had measured today, sitting at Norma's counter on those cracked vinyl stools and in those booths with the tape holding the seams, was something about who they were willing to be. Walter Pruitt stood up from the booth. Steve McQueen stood with him. "The land buyer's still coming Saturday," he said. "Far as I know. Carl Emmett. Call and confirm. Make sure nothing's gotten to him." Walter nodded. "Phone at the feed store. Go make the call." Steve paused. "Then come back. Norma's going to want to feed you." Walter looked at him. The man who had slept in his barn on Ruth's old cot, who had sat at his kitchen table and read a loan agreement in the lamplight and found the thing nobody else had found, who had come to Millard because a fuel line quit on him and happened to be standing on the right road at the right hour. "I don't know how to thank you," Walter said. "Don't," Steve said. "The clause was there. I just read it." "You did considerably more than read it." "A little," Steve said. Walter stopped at the door. He turned and looked back at the corner booth, at the man sitting there with a coffee mug he had not asked for, in Norma's diner on a Friday afternoon in Millard, Kansas. "My wife Ruth would have liked you," Walter said. "She had a way of knowing about people." He went out. Through the window, Steve watched Walter cross Main Street toward the feed store with a purposeful step that had not been there that morning. He watched a man who had been given back something that mattered, and who was now going to make a phone call to make sure Saturday held. Norma came over with the coffee pot. She poured without asking. "He'll be all right now," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Steve said. "What about Haynes?" "The regulator will look at the pattern. Corbin, too. It'll take time, but Bellamy is thorough." Norma set the pot down. "You know," she said, "I've run this counter for 31 years. People bring their serious business to this corner booth. I've seen a lot of hard days worked through at that table." She paused. "Today was some of the best serious business I've seen." Steve looked at her, a small smile, real and brief. "Your pie's very good," he said. "I know," she said. He sat for a while in the quiet of the diner, looking out the window at Main Street, at the town going about its Friday, at the particular quality of a place where people knew each other's business because they knew each other. 2 blocks east, on Jefferson Street, a 1958 Ford F-100 sat behind a chain-link fence in the afternoon sun, faded blue, waiting to be driven home. Saturday came in clear. The kind of morning Kansas produces when it is finally done apologizing for difficult weeks, a sky as blue and wide as anything on earth, and a light that came from everywhere at once and made the fields look like something painted by someone who loved them. Walter Pruitt walked to the impound lot on Jefferson Street before anyone had opened anything. The gate attendant unlocked it without a word. The way people do when they know what is happening is right. Walter stood beside the F-100 for a moment before he got in. The faded blue paint was cool under his hand. He stood with his palm flat on the front panel, just for a moment. The way you stand beside something you are not going to take for granted again. The morning light hit the hood the way it always had, warm and a little worn, familiar as a face. He opened the driver's door. The hinges made the sound they had always made. He slid in. The seat was cold. The steering wheel was the same diameter it had always been, worn smooth at 10 and 2, where 40 years of hands had rested. He looked at the glove box. He reached over and opened it. Inside was the photograph still there, exactly where it had always been, a small rectangle in a paper sleeve. Ruth in the passenger seat on a summer afternoon, sometime in the late 60s, feet on the dashboard, laughing at something outside the frame. He picked it up and held it. Then he put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over on the first try, because Walter had always kept it right, and the sound of it, that particular sound, lower and rougher than a newer engine, the sound of something built to last and maintained that way, filled the cab, and Walter sat very still for a moment and let it. He drove out of the lot onto Jefferson, turned south onto Main, and headed home. He passed Sill's diner. Norma was inside, not yet open for the day, standing at the window with her coffee. She saw the blue truck and raised her mug. He drove out on the county road. The winter wheat on both sides was in the early color between green and gold, the particular shade that only existed here in the spring, that you could not find anywhere else, and could not quite describe to someone who had never seen it. A red-tailed hawk sat on a fence post and watched him pass with the judicial calm of a creature that had been watching this road longer than anyone. Walter drove the way a man drives when he has been given something back, without hurrying, noticing everything. He turned onto the gravel drive. He pulled the F-100 into the barn. Same spot, same morning light, through the gap in the east wall, falling on the hood the way it always had. He turned the engine off. In the silence that followed, the barn smelled of oil and rubber and old hay, and the particular smell of a machine that had been used faithfully for a long time. He sat in it for a few minutes. He did not try to explain to himself what he was feeling, because it was not the kind of thing that needed explaining. He set the photograph on the dash, leaning against the windshield. Ruth, laughing, feet on the dashboard, summer light. He got out and went inside to make breakfast. At the service station, 2 miles out on the county road, Steve McQueen stood beside his car and watched a young mechanic run a hand along the repaired fuel line one final time. The kid was 17 and serious about the work, which Steve appreciated. He did not offer advice. He let the kid finish. Should run clean all the way to New Mexico, the kid said. Good work, Steve said. He meant it. He started the engine from outside, standing at the door, and listened for 15 seconds. It ran right. He closed the hood. Delia Pruitt pulled into the service station lot as he was getting ready to leave. She had a brown paper bag from the diner. She handed it to him. Norma's orders, she said. He looked inside. Biscuits in foil. A piece of cherry pie. Tell her thank you, he said. Delia stood beside him for a moment. She looked at the road, then back at him. My father went to the barn this morning before he made coffee, she said. First thing. He just wanted to hear the engine. Steve nodded. He found the photograph, she said. The one from the glove box. He didn't say much about it. He just set it on the dash and sat there for a while. She paused. He looked like himself again. I hadn't seen that in a long time. Steve looked at the road south. He picked up the biscuit bag. Carl Emmett called this morning, Delia said. He's coming at 10. It's going to be fine. It is, Steve said. She held out her hand. He shook it. She held it for a moment and did not say the thing she was thinking, which was something he appreciated. Some things do not need to be put into sentences. He got in the car. He put the biscuits on the passenger seat and pulled out of the service station onto the county road and drove south toward the highway. The fields moved on both sides in the wind, that slow collective movement of things that have been growing for a long time and intend to keep growing. The sky was the kind of blue that made it hard to believe the world contained anything difficult. A mile out, he passed the turnoff for Walter Pruitt's gravel drive. He did not turn. He looked down the drive as he passed the farmhouse, the barn, and in the gap of the barn's open door, the faded blue of the F-100's front panel catching the morning light. He drove on. The road went straight toward the highway. The mechanic had done good work. The fuel line held. The engine ran the way it was supposed to. He ate a biscuit and did not think about anything in particular, which was his version of feeling all right. Carl Emmett arrived at 9:55. The sale closed at 11:20. The cashier's check covered the first consolidated debt with money left over. Walter paid the bank by wire that afternoon, in full. The teller who processed it had been at First Consolidated for 11 years and understood, without being told, the weight of what she was handling. That evening, Walter sat at the kitchen table with his white mug, the one with the chip on the rim, and looked through the window at the barn. The F-100 was in there in the dark, in its spot, the way it had always been. Delia came in and made them both dinner. She did not turn on the radio. They ate and talked about things that did not need to be heavy: the school, the coming summer, whether the south field would need reseeding. After she left, Walter sat for a while with his empty mug. He thought about Ruth with her feet on the dashboard. He thought about a man who had read a loan agreement at this table by lamplight and found a thing that nobody else had thought to look for. He thought about the sound of an engine turning over on the first try. Outside, the Kansas evening settled over the farm the way it always had, gradually, completely, without ceremony. The sky going from gold to rose, to the particular deep blue that was the last color before dark. In the field beyond the barn, something moved in the wheat. A bird or the wind. Something alive and unhurried. Walter Pruitt set his mug down and went to bed. The truck was in the barn. The photograph was on the dash. And down the county road, heading south, a car with a clean fuel line was already past the county line, moving through the wide Kansas dark toward the highway, disappearing into the kind of silence that people in small towns sometimes remember for the rest of their lives, not because of who was in that car, but because of what he had quietly done before he left.